Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this latest edition of RE311, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Friendship, written by Glacial Fury. Okay, class, the Archie tapped a taloned fingertip on the door to the Orion Heritage Museum. Today we learn about the Battle of Perseus III. She swept a shimmering feathered arm out in a white arc before her, droning on in a monotone, grating voice to a large class of heavy-eyed students who valiantly fought off sleep before the entrance to the museum. A decisive military engagement fought between the Zertai Empire and a relatively unknown species at the time called humans. The Archie met each of her students' drowsy stares with her 4 piercing eyes, before continuing. By the end of this tour, you will understand why this event was so crucial in shaping the current galactic climate of freedom and liberty that we all enjoy today. What is Zerti? A small synthesized voice asked from the back of the gathered students. The teacher's eyes traveled across the sea of curious faces to the rear of the class, where a wolfsty pup stood blinking curiously with paws folded comfortably behind her back and big sparkly eyes that caught and reflected the fire of the afternoon sun. The Archie cleared her throat loudly to show disapproval at being interrupted. The Zerti were a hideously intelligent race of aggressive, methane-breathing insectoids that dominated the middle belt systems of the galaxy during the pre-war years when our equally violent predecessors still embraced the passion of war. She paused for a moment to make sure the pup had no follow-up questions, then continued. They are now practically extinct, with just a few devolved hunter-gatherer colonies left roaming the desolate wasteland of their decimated homeworld. The wolfsty pup blinked her big brown eyes in surprise, then twitched wiry whiskers from side to side in a wolfsy nod of understanding. Oh! The Archie waved away the surge of paws and other appendages that shot up in the air, full of questions. I will answer all your questions in due time, but inside the museum. She informed the class warily, nodding her beak at the door. We have a timetable to keep. With that, she began ushering her class into the museum to start the virtual tour. Once inside, they were approached by a museum administrator who showed them to the hollow suite where the journey would begin. Once everyone was seated in their virtual matrix, a disembodied voice began to speak. It started with a lesson on the violent history of the Zertai Empire. It talked about their aggressive expansionist, warlike ways, and how that led to several conflicts with neighboring civilizations, which resulted in a string of Zerti victories, territory concessions, and the surrounding nations forced into a role of tributary states to the growing Zerti Empire. Still unsatisfied with the broad sphere of influence they controlled, the Zertai Empire initiated an aggressive expansion campaign that swallowed up what remained of the smaller neighbors, and ultimately saw the larger nations capitulate before the might of the Zertai war machine. Eventually, they found themselves in uncharted territory, where they encountered the Orion Federation, a nation of ill-tempered feathered bipeds who would rise to challenge them for supremacy, becoming their principal rival for generations to come. A bloody, protracted war quickly followed the first contact. It's still unclear who fired first, but what we do know is dozens of worlds and billions of lives bore the agony of the warfare that was unleashed. A war that raged on for generations until both empires were hollowed out husks of their former greatness, until their cities and infrastructure lie in smoldering ruins, their economies gutted. Civilians battered and bloody, violent protests, deadly riots, and remnant firestorms that blazed across the land, all contributing to the war-weary nations agreeing to an armistice that ended decades of nightmarish warfare. But it wouldn't be a lasting peace. While the war-shocked people of the Orion Federation concentrated on rebuilding their shattered worlds, the Zertai Empire committed its resources to restore and replenish its armies. One of the advantages of controlling a nation of fanatical zealots is that they don't require creature comforts or conveniences. All they need is essential nutrition, weapons in which to kill their enemies, and the glory of their empire. They will gladly sacrifice everything, including their lives, for the honor of their empire. The Orion Federation moved away from the war and devoted its resources to science and exploration. They charted hundreds of new systems, built colonies and mining operations all across the sector. Eventually, they crossed paths with a friendly species of hominids who called themselves humans, while exploring a remote area of the Perseus Arm. But the memory of the brutal Zertai War was still fresh in their minds of most, so the citizens of the Orion Federation were dubious of the hairless apes at first. But the friendly humans persisted. They offered gifts, cultural exchange, and bridged the language barrier by assisting with translation. Their scientists shared technology, medicine, and new methods of faster-than-light travel. Human musicians blew the Orion away with powerful, soul-stirring music that brought them to tears and haunted their auditory membranes long after the final note faded away. The stunned Orion arm never experienced such an exquisite sound. It was beautiful. Humans called them friend. But the Orion people didn't understand the human concept of friendship. Sure, they had spouses, offspring, and large families that were part of an even larger clan, but they were all related. Nobody had non-relative friends. It was an entirely alien idea to the Orion. Human scholars tried on several different occasions to convey the concept of friendship, but even after all the gifts, exchanges, and cordial talks, the word friendship and the meaning behind it were still lost on the Orion. The social institution of friendship was a uniquely human notion. Part of the exchange saw a human ambassador named Yuri King stationed on board an Orion star cruiser, Nova Spray, bound for the Orion defense citadel Perseus III, when the Zertai Empire inexplicably attacked. Ambassador King was able to get a distress call into subspace, relaying the unprovoked attack to human authorities, before the star cruiser was utterly destroyed along with her fighter escorts. The Zertai Armada swarmed into the Orion system and turned their attention to destroying the defense fleet stationed nearby, before laying siege to the defense citadel, but all outlying colonies. It was not the Zertai from yesteryear. They were more potent and wicked to the core. Their ships dealt in the business of death that shattered all the defenders put before them. The citadel was on the verge of collapse. The ruthless Zertai commanders were so utterly focused on the annihilation of old foes that they didn't notice the human fleets blink into the system. Now here is something to keep in mind. Human culture is heavily steeped in beauty and elegance, all sculptured curves and sweeping architecture. Their arts, buildings, cities, even their clothing, brilliant masterpieces. Everything about them artfully tasteful, except for one thing. Their warships. Those were all sharp angles and menacing spikes, hideous hulks of thick, jagged, jutting armor and bristling weapons. Black nightmares lurking in a low starlight of space. They were absolutely terrifying, and they were absolutely determined. The Orion Federation was just as shocked as the Zertai when the human forces warped into the system with guns blazing. The Zertai Armada was quickly overwhelmed by human firepower and found themselves being systematically destroyed. The stunned Zertai commanders couldn't believe how much firepower the alien ships were putting out. Even more shocking was how much punishment their smallest vessels could take. They were veritable damage sponges, capable of soaking up even the strongest Zertai attacks with little effort on the thick human armor. The result was scores of shattered Zertai ships littering the area and clouds of swirling hull segments. Disabled Zertai dreadnoughts listed powerless in the empty blackness of space, their methane atmospheres venting vapors of glittering crystals that slowly spiral into the void. The battle was over in less than a day, with the victorious humans chasing the few surviving Zertai warships out of the system with their tails tucked between their legs. When the war ended, a ceremony was held honoring those who fought in the Battle of Perseus III. The Orion Federation presented a golden plaque of priceless brontium to the human allies with a single word stenciled across its mirrored surface. Friendship. End of story. I would like to thank our T5 members and patrons, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Vidmori, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.